Welcome back to the official Beast Lab. This is Gurenlian. I'm here today with Emily Perrin, owner of PerrinWellnessandFitness.com. Emily has been working with women's lacrosse for Team USA for a while. She is working with a lot of professional athletes with mindfulness and yoga, and I'm so excited to have you in here today, Emily, so we can talk shop.
Yeah, let's do it.
So first off, give me a rundown of what you do, because I think a lot of people, when they come to this website, they're looking for strength and conditioning, but they have no idea what the yoga mindfulness part of this is, how important this can be for an athlete.
Yeah, totally. So, really, what I do is a very holistic approach to performance enhancement. And I say performance enhancement, but really, what I really help athletes do is honestly navigate life in a more efficient way. And for an elite athlete, life happens to include performing, competing, playing a sport, right? And so I don't look at them as like a separate entity, right? Like you've got your sport and your, being an athlete and competing and winning and losing over here, and then you got your life over here. Like it's all one thing, right? And so if we can get you as an athlete living life, right, the day to day, the highs and lows, navigating that in a more efficient way, I think your performance is going to enhance or at least become more consistent. And I'll be honest, I think and you've been at this for a long time, right? When you're at that elite level, like consistency is more so the name of the game, right? Just being able to bring your best on a consistent basis. And so I do that through kind of four main practices, which is mindfulness, which we can dive into. That's kind of a big segment and the driver in what I do, right? This way of being, but also a skill we can train. Meditation, breath work, and yoga. And so I kind of mosh all four of these practices to give athletes, really to empower athletes to kind of take control of their lives. And really, I think so much in sport, specifically like the mental side of sport, I think tends to kind of disconnect the mind and the body, right? We tend to look at like, okay, let's take care of your mental headspace, and then there's like the physical piece. But really, we need to be considering them as one, because I think a lot of people don't understand that whatever you are thinking, whatever you're feeling, right, is showing up somehow in the body, right? I'm actually reading a really fascinating book right now called The Molecules of Motion. And what, with science and research and being able to kind of scan the brain, we actually know that when we think, we have a thought, it actually produces an entire chain reaction physiologically. And so the two are not disconnected. And so a lot of the work that I am doing is a very embodied approach, right? So getting athletes to see the connection, understand the connection, and therefore take control of their lives in the day to day and in the performance setting.
Wow. And you use the word empowerment too, which
Yeah.
I think encompasses all of it. I always used to joke with my friends during college football season when they would bet on college football games. And I said, I never bet on college sports because I have no idea if the Heisman quarterback's girlfriend just dumped him right before that game.
100%.
And all of a sudden, everything, you know what I mean? So explain to me the mindfulness, because I think empowerment as a college athlete, understanding how all of those stressors that are new to you, right? Navigating life away from home, being part of a college environment. We call it student athlete, but you're really an athlete who's being paid to go to school. So give me a little insight on, if I'm a new incoming freshman, how you would start to help me navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I think it's helpful to just kind of like define what is mindfulness, because I think a lot of people still, and I'm half the battle with me is like just kind of explaining like, what do you do, right? I think we're still moving in this age where mindfulness is quite a buzzword. It's gaining a lot of traction. And I think, some of that had to do with like, The Last Dance and, that whole like, segment on Michael Jordan, and people are like going crazy with, yeah, mindfulness. But like, what is that? I think what has happened is this is a, 2,500-year-old concept from Buddhist and Hindu philosophy that has made its way to the 21st century athlete in sport. And there's a lot that's been lost in that. And so mindfulness as a definition is simply paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. And so it is this very nuanced, unique way of observing and relating to our experience. And it's very counterintuitive to how we live our everyday life, right? And I think especially for a modern day athlete, right? We live in a society, sport and not, where it is like, go, 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 go. The more, the better, right? Faster, better. Let's pile 1,000 things onto our plate so that, we're just running around like chickens with our head chopped off. And I think that's much of, let's just take a college athlete's life, right? I mean, so often, my day-to-day is working mostly with college athletes. And sometimes it's, a session on the field at 6 o'clock at night. And I'm the first person in their entire day that has gotten them to just sit down and take a breath, So mindfulness really is this quality, this way of being and something that we can train ourselves to be better at. And what it really helps us do is, one, gain much more insight and awareness into ourselves, into who we are, into how we think, how we feel, how we react and respond to things, so that we can take a step back and say, do I want to respond or react in that way, or do I not? And for an athlete, that can be really freaking monumental, right? Both on the field, on the court, and off. And so what we're doing is something that is just, we're giving ourselves agency, right? We're giving ourselves the ability to take a little bit of power, take a little bit of control back of our mind and our body. And that is a really profound shift. And so really, when I step on campus, or a lot of times, some of the programs that I've been working with now for a few years, most of this initial meeting just happens with the freshmen, right? Because all the upperclassmen already kind of know the drill. And so the conversation really just kind of looks like one that we're having, which is like, hey, like, what is mindfulness? Has anybody ever heard of mindfulness, right? I think a lot of athletes, or I'm seeing more and more, come into college with an understanding or an experience of one of the above, some yoga, maybe some meditation, right? Like downloaded an app and have no idea what's going on, but somebody told me it was good for me, right? Some breath work. They're like, yeah, got it. But really, it's a very nuanced process that, much like everything else that we do in sport, takes repetition, and it takes a very intentional, deliberate, practiced response. Let's take just face-off guys, right? I mean, all of these face-off clinics, I've been following you for a while. Like, how many reps do you think these guys, especially your college guys, have taken over and over, right? That's what is required for them to get to the level that they want to compete at. And it's the exact same thing with this stuff, right? And so it takes a very deliberate and intentional way of thinking, way of practicing, and you can do it a lot of different ways, right? And I think what makes me kind of unique is I approach it from a lot of different angles, right? I try to really help athletes. And again, it gets back to that empowering piece of, let's understand this concept, right? Let's understand how it resonates with you, and how do we fit this stuff into your life so that it's working for you, and we're not necessarily trying to fit you into a cookie cutter practice that may not work with you. And so a lot of the individual work, and I'll give you an example, like, Jules Henningberg, right? Some of the work and a lot of the work that we've done together is really fine tuning some of this stuff so that it fits into the person that he is and the player that he wants to be, right? And the business owner of Mission Prime. So that's really what I'm about, and how I help athletes through these practices, if that makes sense.
Well, that's why I had you on here. I only bring people on here that are really, really passionate about what they do, and that's why you're good at what you do. Okay, so we'll jump back in. I think from a face-off perspective, people ask me all the time, how much of it is mental and how much of it is physical? And I said, well, you have to understand there's actually three things at play. There's emotion too. So we're on the field, out of 100%, we're on the field for about 30 seconds at a time. So in a game, face-offs are actually 90% mental, 10% physical, because you get to go do something. You have to run off the field and you have to think about it for 4 minutes. What did I just do? Did I lose a face-off? Did I lose 3 in a row? And then when you look down the sideline as a face-off guy, there are 24 to 30 people who have no idea about what you do and don't understand. All they know is you lost 3 face-offs, and it is lonely as shit. So what I try to do is I try to prepare my guys, because the problem I run into is my very best face-off guys never lose face-offs. They go 70%, they go 80% in their clinics. Unless I hop in with them and try to humble them a little bit, but I'm getting to an age now where I only got a few more years where I can do that. They go to college and they lose face-offs and they go 51% and they lose their minds. And I think what you're offering is so valuable, because guys who are used to winning don't know how to lose. And I tell them, when I did all this stuff behind me, I was still losing 20 or 30% of my face-offs. So even if you're all world, it doesn't matter, because you still have to deal with losing at some point. So explain to me, as a face-off guy, I tell my guys, when you lose your face-off, from the time that happens to the time you get to the sideline, you have that time to feel bad for yourself. Once you get to the sideline, it's time to focus on what you did wrong and how to fix it for the next face-off. Because if you're analytical, it stops you from being as emotional. But maybe there's something else that I should be telling my guys. What should I be telling my guys?
Well, I love that. And I think it's, it's so interesting because I think there's a lot of debate, and, I tend to just kind of like peruse Twitter more so. I'm getting better about putting content out, but I like to peruse Twitter because I think there's a lot of, we're kind of moving in this age, and I'll back up a little bit because twofold. Like, my dad has a PhD in sports psychology, so he coached basketball at UVA for 15 years, and then transitioned into his own work. He's been to 2 World Cups with the men's national team. He's been in the NBA for about 15 years. The man. So really, my first sign of a lot of this work, right, this kind of more mental, emotional piece, comes from him. I mean, this is what I grew up with, right? And I think what we're seeing is in this kind of more mental space, right? You've got my dad's generation, which at the time you would go to school and you'd get a PhD in sports psychology, right? Very kind of sport focused. And really, like, he doesn't touch any of like the more mental health, emotional piece, right? Mm-hmm. And then we've kind of moved into an age where, I'm sure you see like this new like mental performance coach, right? Like, what does that mean? We're kind of moving in this age where I think a lot of people call themselves that, do mental performance stuff. But again, what does that really mean? And then I think there's what I try to do, which is a much more holistic approach, right? Which is really, again, understanding that, well, you can't really separate just performance and kind of like your comment of like, we have no idea what's happening in the potential Heisman Trophy winner's life, right? Like, exactly. His girlfriend could have broken up with him, or like, a parent could have died the day. We just have no idea. And you can't separate the two. And what I really appreciate about what you just said is that I think you're acknowledging that this is a total experience, right? It is. And we have to make space for the total experience, which is loss, right? I just lost a face-off. Like, this is a shitty experience. And I am of the philosophy that we need to make room for that, right? Like, that is a valid experience of an elite athlete that wants to be good, right? No shit, they're going to be annoyed that they just lost. Like, they're going to be frustrated. And I think the more that we tell kids that they can't feel that way, that that's not beneficial, that that's going to prevent them from succeeding, I think we're wrong. That is and so I kind of love how what you're telling your kids is, hey, give yourself this space to feel annoyed about it, to feel pissed off, to give yourself this room to say, you know what, this is something that matters to me, and I'm frustrated, and this is hard, and this is something that I'm not necessarily have experienced a lot, right? Which is, you're telling me that, these kids that are winning all the time, they get to college and they're losing. Like, that's a transition for them. And so that feeling, right, needs to have space. And so what you're telling them is like, hey, take it till the sideline. Get pissed off, get angry. I will never tell an athlete not to be angry. Never. I won't. Because what that is telling them is that it matters. It's actually coming from a really good place. And so if you just kind of allow yourself a little bit of time to the sideline, I work in baseball a lot, so it's in between swings. I mean, baseball's very similar to face off, right? I mean, the amount of time, like, right, baseball can take freaking 6 hours, like, and the amount of time that you're actually up at the plate swinging is like nothing. And so what do? You're in your head the rest of the time. Yeah. I will never tell an athlete not to be frustrated walking away from the plate when they've just been struck out. I won't, because that's a valid experience. Now here's the difference. You have to understand how to feel that and not necessarily act on that, right? And so, fine. I'm totally fine with you saying, like, let's take until the sideline, right? To just freaking feel how you're feeling, right? Be pissed off, right? Get angry, like, cuss at yourself if you need to, right? Like, I don't have a problem with that, because it's a valid experience and it needs to happen. Now, what you're also saying is, like, you can't stay there, right? Which is what oftentimes athletes struggle with. And it's a really fine line. And it is a skill. I mean, I'm pretty open about, like, how I got into this work, which is just my own experience with mental health and chronic anxiety and panic. There's a huge difference in allowing yourself to feel anxious and understand that you're anxious for a potential reason, staying there, going down the rabbit hole, right, and spiraling, or just feeling that and knowing how to move yourself out of that. Huge difference, right? And so, no, I wouldn't really critique or tell you to be telling your guys anything different. Now, I think the other piece of this is, and a lot of my work in baseball in particular, and so I think there's some parallels with face-off, is that, we as athletes ultimately, and this is what I really try to empower athletes to understand, is that we know ourselves better than anybody else. We know ourselves better than anybody else. We know, and we should get to the point where we know what we need, right, to navigate, right, to be ready for the next face-off. And so that's where kind of the fine tuning of a lot of this mindfulness, this very embodied experience, fits in, right? We need to find ways for you to get through whatever you're experiencing in a more efficient way. That is not going to look like what the guy next to you needs, right? And so it's a very individualized process. But no, I think you're very much spot on and in line with kind of my philosophy of things, which is like, dude, every experience on the field matters, and how we're feeling about them matters, and they all deserve time, they all deserve space. Now, I'm not saying that we all need to go off in a corner and sit and wallow, not at all, right? But I love kind of what you're saying, which is like, give yourself the time and the space, but then, right, we got to move through this, because you're up in potentially 30 seconds, right, if the other team scores. So I love that.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the tough things for me in my career, people ask me all the time, my son Jack's going to face off. I'm like, sure as hell hope not. Yeah. It is a tough thing to do. And, I think one of my biggest issues when I would run off the field, if, say, there have been games where the referee is just letting the guy get away with murder, right? He's doing something completely illegal, slowing me up, it's costing me possessions for my team, run off the sideline, and you just curse to yourself. And I'd always try to get through the box all the way behind the bench and just yell to myself, do whatever I can just to get it out for a second. And I'd always have that one or two teammates be like, hey man, we need you, stay in the game, like calm down. Like, and you're like, dude, I just need this right now. No one gives a shit about me most of the time. Just let me go be by myself for a second. And I don't think they understand. I know they mean well, and that's usually what it is. They mean well because they're thinking team, right? Like, that if you act like that in the corner for 5 seconds, that's going to bring the whole sideline down, and I understand that. But the problem is, I think you do all this work if I'm a guy who on a team and I really am trying to get better, right? Like similar to, say, you have an addiction, an alcohol addiction, and you go and you get treated for it, and you come back, but you're coming back to the exact same environment that you were living in before. So how important is the team concept to understand the mindfulness that you're treating with one athlete?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's a great reference. Yeah, it's huge. And I think, it's kind of like that. I got this from my dad. I think there's the quintessential, like, there's no I in team, right? Well, let's think about this. If you have a bunch of I's that are not that are not functioning well, that are not healthy, that you are not going to have a team. I can tell you that right now, as someone who has, coached at the college level. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so I really feel like, actually, the individual piece and getting your individuals to the best that they can be, right? And giving them the tools and the resources to be able to withstand and handle stuff is actually really important when it comes to building a team. And so, yeah, I think it goes both ways. I think it is, that's an interesting, yeah, I see a little bit of that in baseball as well. But I think we also need to understand that there's a balance. It is, just because, at least I'm under the impression that, like, just because you go off in the corner, or the edge of the team line, whatever you call it, and you kind of have your moment, doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you're negatively impacting the team. That's just my philosophy, right? Now, I think there are definitely times and places where that's not appropriate, right? But to me, that just, I think there has to be an understanding, there has to be a balance. And so the team piece, and to be fair, most of the work that I do starts at the team level, right? So getting the entire team on the same page, getting the coaching staff. I think having the coaching staff on board and understanding this stuff is really important, because, if I learned anything about my time coaching in college, like, the coaching staff is the driver of team culture, right? And so it is really important to have a whole functioning unit on the same level. At the same time, there's a lot of individual work that has to happen, and understanding that, not everybody is going to be like you. That's a really important concept. And so mindfulness, I will say this, is like, yes, it is a lot of insight and awareness about ourselves, but that insight and awareness also has to stem to other people, right? How am I reacting and relating to my teammates, and to relationships? That's a big piece of the equation as well. And so, yeah, it's a really, very complex. Again, it's not a final destination thing, in that, like, oh, okay, like, I'm going to have this all figured out. I'm going to get this mindfulness concept. I'm going to get this routine and these practices that are going to work for me. And okay, all said and done. Like, no, life doesn't work that way, right? Like, things are constantly coming up in life, interactions, sport, all the above, that we're having to adapt and be flexible in. And so what mindfulness does is allows you to kind of ride that out and adjust and be flexible. And that's a really, I almost think that's, like, the biggest piece about all of this, is just that space to be able to understand that, holy crap, everything is always changing. And I, as a person, need to be able to adapt to the people around me. And I think that's a really big part of being a good team as well.
100%. I think you make a lot of great points. Something that sticks out to me about mindfulness, I've been working on it personally with my therapist for about a year, ever since the pandemic started.
Yeah.
And Coach Tierney, with Team USA and Hofstra's head coach, amazing guy, always says the same thing. He says, be where your feet are, right?
Yeah.
And I struggle with that a lot, because I feel like a lot of times my greatest strength is that from a business perspective, is that I will wake up and I will go as hard as I need to go to get whatever needs to get done correctly and the best way possible. What I struggle with at this point in my life is, how do I, from a mindfulness perspective, realize that work is not my life, and that I'm trying to be a father and a husband, etc.
Yeah.
And realize that my life is my life, and that work is something that I need to get done throughout the day. How can I reorganize my mind? Because my mind, from an athletic standpoint, for years was driven to be the best face-off guy possible, right?
Yeah.
Then I retired. And then it was like, well, I need to be the best coach possible. I need to give my athletes everything I have. When the reality of it is I should have stepped out of that into retirement and had more time for life and learn to have, I think, not just as a lacrosse player, but I think people that are into bodybuilding, people that are doing figure competitions, any kind of athlete is sitting there going, yeah, I want this driving force because it helps me succeed, but how can I make sure it doesn't consume me?
Yeah. So let's start with this. So I love this concept of be where your feet are, right? I work very closely with Duke Baseball, and that's one of their kind of mottos as well. However, I think it's also really important to understand that being where your feet are is an incredibly hard thing to do for any human. Not just, I mean, even like someone like me who like spends my life's work teaching this stuff and doing this stuff. You know, we spend 40 to 50% of our day on autopilot, which means we're just in habitual patterns, right? And that's a really good thing because, you know, like let's take just driving, for example, right? If we had to relearn how to drive a car every single time we got in the car, like it would take us freaking 10 hours to get anywhere, right? And so it's really great that we can operate for the most part on autopilot. But when it comes to being present and actually like enjoying the moment, and that a lot of times that's with the people we love, in sport specifically, right? Like we have to be literally what is required of us as athletes to compete is to be where we are, right? This is a really hard thing to do. And so I think that a lot of coaches, a lot of people, especially in the mental performance space, throw this out as just this like string of spaghetti that they're going to like throw on the wall and like hoping that it sticks. What we need to understand is that being where our feet are and being present is a process. This is a process that we have to continuously and almost relentlessly work our way into and then rework our way into, because the mind is designed to be all over the place. The mind is designed to go to whatever is most appealing, right? Whether that's a dream, whether that's a fantasy, whether that's tomorrow's agenda, right? The mind is designed to do that. And so I come from the philosophy that if we just understand that and we kind of drop the judgment that like, shit, I'm getting distracted again, or like, shit, I can't be where my feet are. Like, if we just drop the judgment of like, hey, that's how our brains are designed, right? And you know what? It's pretty cool. It's kind of what makes us human, right? It almost flips the script. And this is where like a lot of the self-talk work that I do with mindfulness comes into play. Like it flips the script so that what we see is that, oh, it's actually a really normal thing that I struggle with this. And you know what? How I be with my feet, right? How I be where my feet are is really this process of like tuning into the body, finding my breath, right? Using my five senses. And that's something that I have to do over and over again. And so this is where things like meditation and a yoga practice and breath work become the training ground for that, right? And so when we understand what that feels like, what that looks like for us to be present, then we have an anchor. So then what happens is the brain starts to change and shift, and then we know, and we can kind of flip back and forth through that more easily. So that this idea of being present now is more available to us, and that's what we want. And so the first thing that I tell people is like, this being where your feet are is incredibly hard. So right off the bat, like, let's just drop the judgment. Like when I find myself, and right now I'm doing a lot of just like content creation, and I'm home a lot on the computer and by myself a lot. And I have found the last week that I just like haven't been able to focus. And so what I have started doing is like, just, you know, when I get distracted, just like stop and acknowledge, like, you know what, here I go. I'm distracted again. You know what? That's the brain. That's life. I take a couple deep breaths. I walk around my apartment. I come back and I sit down. And Greg, I may have to do that 100 times in a day, but that's freaking being human, right? That is a realistic approach. That is not, I'm not trying to sell you this thing of like, well, let's just give you this routine and this exercise. And you know what? You're never going to deal with distraction again. Not going to happen. It's just not. It's just, It's literally not going to happen. And so I don't approach it that way. So I think the first thing is like, literally just understanding that, you know what, this is the human experience. This is who I am, right? And this has, I'm going to just put this out there, this kind of mode, right? This way of being for you has given you and proved for you a ton of success, right? As a player, as a coach. So it makes a lot of sense that, like, you know, this is where you're at. That's just kind of where I would start, right? And then the second piece of this is like, we can't just throw out be where your feet are, or like be present, right? Be in the present moment. What the F does that mean? Right? Like, that's, again, it's a process, right? And so this is where really we have to realize that the only thing that's ever in the present moment is our body. That's where the be where your feet are came from, right? The physical body. It's the mind that wanders off. Okay. So great, right? If I can find and feel my body, engage my body in sense. So I'll throw out a couple terms here, right? Interoception, which is what am I feeling inside of me, right? Whether that's like emotion or like pain, right? Or like hot, cold, right? All these interoception. There's exteroception, which is like, okay, what's happening outside of me, right? Did a bird just fly by, right? That's using all the five senses to take in. And then there's proprioception, which is like, where am I in space, right? So like the crazy thing is that sometimes it's as simple as just like acknowledging where you are. Oh, like I'm in my room, I'm seated on my chair, like here's where I'm at, right? These are all the things that really help us bring our brain to the present moment, right? And so that in itself is an actually really complicated process, right? That's something that we have to actually like very intentionally engage in over and over. And so if I'm working with athletes, right, let's go back to face off, right? So for a face-off guy that may feel like, you know, his brain is all over the place on game day, right? You know, maybe he just feels really distracted. He feels kind of off his game. You know, his actual like conversion rate of wins to losses is not going well, right? Okay, so I come to this as like, there's nothing that I don't think a coach or another teammate or even me as like a mindfulness person could say to you that could, you know, just magically make all this better. What we can do, right, is allow you to get centered and grounded in your physical body so that you can just show up to the best of your ability for the next face-off. And what that requires is you to be present, okay? So what this might look like is, well, what does being present look like for a face-off guy on the sideline? Well, really grounding down through his feet, gripping his stick, right? You've got a stick in your hand, okay? Maybe you do something like just acknowledging and looking around. Where are you actually physically on the sideline? Are you at the end of the sideline? Are you behind the coaches? Like, right? So really kind of, and this is like a little bit of orienting, right? We're just giving our brain data of where we actually are in time and space. And what that allows this face-off guy to do is just like, okay, I'm in my body, I'm here. And if I can just be here in my physical body, I'm going to give myself the best possible chance to go win the next face-off. And even if I don't win, right, at least I'm training myself to do this thing that I think more often than not will set that person up for success. Does that make sense? Yeah. I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but.
No, I mean, what you're saying is true. I think, for instance, I am enamored with athletes at the highest level that play golf and can make a 3-foot putt with millions of people watching. Yeah. Or an athlete that can hit a free throw with 1 second left in order to tie the game in the Final Four. Yeah. That stuff is some of the most impressive, because I honestly think like winning a face-off is still a very physical thing. On the whistle, you punch your hand, but like everything being still around you and you having to focus on the technical skill of doing this rather than when I make this, I'm going to go crazy. If I miss this, it's going to be devastating. Like all that stuff you have to get rid of. The guy with the red sign right through, like right behind the backboard, like all of that stuff is, I find that to be some of the hardest things to do in sports because you have to quiet yourself and focus on the task at hand and not see anything outside. And what you're saying sounds so valuable because there is a moment. Coach Van Arsdale at Penn State used to say ebb and flow. in a game. You're going to get hit in the mouth. It doesn't even matter if it's the best game ever. You're going to get hit in the mouth at some point. You have to be able to keep moving forward. And I think the greatest thing about sports, and I think athletes don't realize how they practice mindfulness really. You see how many times Brett Favre, remember when his father passed away, went out, threw for 400 yards the next day. You know, someone has a death in the family, somebody has, you know, a sickness in the family, or something happened tragically in their hometown. You see athletes all the time go out and have the game of their lives because it gives you peace, because you can focus strictly on being in the athletic contest rather than what's going on in the rest of the world. And I'll be honest, that was some of the only times that I really was at peace, was when I was bloody and tired and battling in a face-off. So for athletes that, you know, because everybody who's on this site isn't technically, you know, going to be a athlete, a lacrosse player or anything. Maybe they're just somebody that just wants to compete in CrossFit, or maybe there's somebody who just wants to go to the gym and they want to learn a lot. How do you help somebody when they go to the gym? Because I touched on this with somebody else during an interview. There's this concept of how do you stay motivated, and that's not a thing. You're not always motivated. A lot of it comes down to discipline. And so how do you go to the gym when you need a good workout? Shit's just not going right at home. And you just want to focus on that because you know it'll make you feel better. Like, how do you get in the car? Because I want to kind of leave with this. How do you get in the car and get yourself ready to go do a workout or whatever your training regimen might be when you need it and your mind isn't there?
Yeah. Oh my God. I think this is such I'm actually this is funny because I'm very much dealing with this right now. I'm coming off kind of a few weeks of just feeling very unmotivated, which is very unlike me. I am a very type A driven. I mean, like, you're talking to the person that like never stops running, and that's how I operate. And so the past week has been I was texting my mom 2 days ago and I was like, what's happening? I'm not okay. Like something's not right. And I really resonate with this. Like we cannot operate there. We just cannot always be motivated and driven. And, you know, I think the people, you're right. It 100% just comes down to discipline. But I also think that a major piece of this equation is that it also comes down to balance and knowing that, you know what, sometimes it is simply okay to be in a place where you're not driven and you're not disciplined. It is okay. Right. And I really I very much operate on that. Like it's all about balance, because I think what allows you from those moments where you're not as disciplined, you're not motivated, is, you know, you allow for rest and downtime, which is just as important. And holy crap, we could talk. I mean, that can be a whole other episode of a lot of the work that I do, right? Which is very, again, counterintuitive to like the grind, right? We live in, you know, a society that loves the grind. How would I approach this? Well, I think part of it is, you know, and really, to be fair, a lot of the mindfulness work that I do with individuals starts with a pretty intense analysis of values. I think that if we are very clear as athletes, as people, right? Because I think a lot of this stuff, like, yes, I tend to work with athletes, but I think this shit is extremely valuable for the everyday person. If we're really clear on our values, the life we want to live, the person that we want to be, right? Like to the core, right? More often than not, what I find is that on these days or these times where we're just not motivated, right? Yeah. We're not as disciplined. If we can remind ourselves, right? Catch ourselves thinking about or reflecting on, you know, really I'm the person that like, I value productivity. I value hard work. Okay. I'm not very disciplined or motivated today. Is there simply, and this is where this can allow us to find the balance, right? Okay. Maybe I don't go get in the car and do a full hour workout. You know what? Maybe I actually get out of my car and I just go for a walk, because you know what? I value movement. I know it's good for my body, but at the same time, I'm just not feeling the gym right now. So can I meet myself halfway? Right? I'm a huge advocate of stuff like that. I think that is, and really what we're doing there in that process is having mindfulness, right? We're creating the space to be able to kind of take a step back and acknowledge what our experience is, which is, I'm not motivated right now. I really, the last thing I want to do is go to the gym. Okay, I'm going to just acknowledge that that's my experience. I'm not going to judge it, right? I'm not going to, derail. I'm not going to tell myself that I'm a load of shit. Like, no, this is a common human experience. Let's make some room for that. Okay, but what I'm also not going to do is like force myself in this moment right now to go to the gym and bust out an hour workout where my body's not feeling it. Potentially I could get hurt. So you know what could I do instead? Go for a walk, right? And you know what, Greg, like maybe in that process, you get to the point where like, you know what, you do say, you know what, F it. I'm just going to go to the work. I'm just going to go to the gym and I'm going to do a 30-minute workout, right? That piece is like totally up to the individual. But I think what we're doing there is we're finding the space, right? And that's that like pulling out of that just like reactive mode of potentially either like, going down the rabbit hole and kind of feeling down on ourselves. And, because we're not motivated, we're going to beat ourselves up. And I actually think that backfires a lot of the time. Like, right. That in the past for me would lead me to like drive to freaking Chick-fil-A. And so like, I'm not going to go work out, right? I'm not going to walk. I'm just going to go, shove some Chick-fil-A in my mouth, which is fine. Like, I'm not judging that, but it doesn't make me feel great after. So it's the bringing the mindfulness to the situation, a little bit of that, just like knowing what your experience is, and then having that really clear vision of like, well, who's the person that I want to be at the end of the day, more often than not. And that's what allows us to kind of find balance in situations like that.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's a struggle for most people. And I think, we live in this Instagram world where all you get is Instagram version of people. Like for me, and this is what I love about this project, is it's allowing me to be a little bit more human, a little bit more brutally honest. I think a lot of people, they look at me on Instagram and they think, oh, this guy's got this guy's making this. The reality of it is I live an anxiety-ridden life. And, I tell my wife all the time, I hope at the middle of the night I don't wake up to go to the bathroom or anything, because then I'm not going back to sleep. And it doesn't matter if it's 2 a.m, 5 a.m, if work creeps in there, it's over. And it's not always a bad thing, but usually it means that I'm tired the next day. And I want to be a better father. I want to be a good husband. And I don't have the energy for it because I'm so anxiety ridden. I think athletes have to understand the part that I'm taking away the most from what we're talking about today is not the anxiety or the issue with being present, more so the guilt that comes with it. Right? Like for me, I get real mad at myself when I can't focus on a workout. I just wasted time getting mad at myself. Right? And I think for a lot of guys, if I can speak towards face-off guys again, it's not that they are selfish because they only care about their face-offs. It's not that they don't know how to deal with anything. It's just they want to be great so badly that they feel terrible that they're not performing for their team. And I can speak from experience. I remember in 2014, in 2010, Team USA went out and beat Canada by 1 in the World Games in the gold medal game. They went 50% on faceoffs. In 2014, Chris Eck and I were on the team. Gold medal game, we go 50% on faceoffs. We lose. I know rationally that it wasn't our fault. But for 4 years, I hated myself for not getting more faceoffs in that game because I thought that's what we needed. And I felt like a failure, even though I did nothing worse than the last team. 2018, we go well over and we win. But for 4 years, that anxiety and that self-hate aged me. And it didn't matter. 2015, league MVP, win a championship, it didn't matter. It was still there. So I think for a lot of people, whether it's a small loss, like getting in the car and you were supposed to hit legs today, and I'm not going to go to the gym today. That's, they think about that way too long, all the way up to what I just described. I think what you offer is something that athletes really need to listen to because it can help them with that component, which I know can be so devastating. And I want to thank you because what you are talking about today is incredibly valuable. I would actually love for you to tell us where people can find you, not only on social, but also in other spots as well.
Yeah. I want to validate your experience because I think that's really important. And what I will tell you is that this whole process, right? This guilt, this non-judgment, right? This kind of follow-up, that's something that, especially for athletes, right? I just put something on my Twitter today about how a lot of this stuff is the training ground for us to be able to practice this, right? We don't just wake up and not hate ourselves for going 50%, right? This is something that we have to engage in little by little every day. And that's how the shift changes. Greg, trust me, I deal with it every day. Like, this is not something, and again, I have all the tools, right? I have this stuff, and we still have to engage with the process, and it takes time. So I just want to validate your experience and let athletes know that it takes time. Even for people like us, right? Over 30 years old, athletic careers are over. We're still dealing with this stuff. And so, granted, I think this stuff helps. So where can people find me? I am on Instagram. I think I am. No, I am. I have to. Sometimes I forget my own handle. Emily Larson P is my personal, and that's really where I post the majority of my content and stuff. I do have a business account, Perrin Wellness and Performance. I'm on Twitter, and then obviously my website is perrinwellnessperformance.com. I try to put out as much content as I can, and I'm kind of doing a few fun projects in the new year where I'll do some IG live stuff, so people can look for that. But yeah, that's kind of where everyone can find me. And really, a lot of the work that I do is I'm down in Durham, but I travel. I mean, I pop in. A lot of the work that I do consists of going in, doing workshops, spending 1 to 3 days with a community or an organization, a team, and then supporting them, throughout their season or the off season, whatever. So yeah, people can just reach out if they want to know more.
Awesome, Emily. Thank you so much for coming on here. I'm going to have Emily on for a couple more segments because she does a lot more than what we talked about today. So I want to thank you very much for making it official here on the Beast Lab.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
When we come back for premium subscribers, we're going to go to the post game. Emily and I are going to talk shop a little bit more. So just stick around for that.